Okay, move out.
In the spring of 1965, the 1st United States Army combat troops were committed to the conflict raging in South Vietnam. The Viet Cong, fearful of the new M16 automatic weapon, called them the men with the little black rifles. Hanoi Hanna called them juvenile delinquents in green T-shirts. They were American paratroopers of the 173rd Airborne Brigade, and with fierce pride in their outfit, they called themselves the Sky Soldiers. Just back from Vietnam, a freelance correspondent documents the story of the unusual breed of fighting men known as the Sky Soldiers. To learn their story, he lived with the paratroopers of the 173rd Airborne Brigade, followed them through the steaming jungles and rice paddies of South Vietnam, where they have made history.
The first time I saw them was the morning of May 5th, 1965. A seemingly endless stream of big-bellied silver C-130s began landing at Bien Hua Air Base, about 18 miles northeast of Saigon. Along with other correspondents, I'd gone to Vietnam to cover the arrival of the first U.S. Army combat troops. Watching them disembark, you couldn't help seeing that there was a special quality about these men. Young? Sure. But the way they moved and formed up without any confusion, well, there was the feeling you get when you're watching real pros. They knew their business. After seeing them, I decided that I would stay in Vietnam and see these paratroopers in action. Brigadier General Ellis Williamson, commander of the 173rd, had arrived on the lead plane. Asked how long before his troops would be ready to begin patrols, he answered, "Tonight." As a matter of fact, it was a lot sooner than that. In only a few hours, there was a perimeter guard about the airbase. And patrols were moving out beyond the barbed wire. It was the first time in more than a year that any troops had made extended patrols outside the area. Besides setting up brigade headquarters at Bien Hua, a task force was landed at Vung Tau. It consisted of an infantry battalion with engineer and medical units, and its job was to secure and defend that airfield. A few days later, the rest of the brigade's personnel and equipment arrived by sea. They proceeded by road convoy to Bien Hua. Now, with all of its men and equipment, the 173rd was set to get rolling. The next 2 weeks were spent in sharpening combat techniques and revising tactics. These included eagle flights, fast strikes on targets of opportunity. And foot patrols in hostile areas. At the same time, the armored troops and the cavalry were making a show of force on the network of roads and conducting reconnaissance. Once secure, the roads came alive with native transport. For the first time in many months, the people of the province could journey to market and visit friends and family. The 173rd is a separate brigade, meaning that it's not part of a division. It's self-contained, the first Airborne Brigade to be so classified. At that time, the combat units consisted of 2 battalions of infantry, an artillery battalion with 3 firing batteries, a cavalry troop, and a company of armor. Combat support units included a medical company, a company of engineers, a maintenance company, signal and communications units, transport, supply, and administration. Independence of movement was provided by 2 platoons of troop-carrying helicopters and a gunship platoon. With the Bien Hua area made secure, large-scale attacks against the enemy were mounted. The largest of these took place at the end of May and employed nearly all of the combat units in the brigade. The infantry, artillery, and cavalry, as well as engineers and a platoon of volunteers from administration, supply, and maintenance units. It seemed as though everybody wanted to get into the act. The operation was strictly an infantry-type air mobile assault. The landing zones had been pounded by the Air Force. Then, minutes before the task forces arrived, Army gunships of the brigade made a final sweep. The gunship platoon, nicknamed the Cowboys from their radio call sign, softened up the landing zones, or LZs. Then the first task force swung into action. It was made up of cavalry, engineers, support troops, and artillery. Their first mission was to secure the LZs for the other 2 task forces. When the other 2 task forces landed, the first elements were already in high gear. The operation got underway quickly and efficiently. You had to be impressed. Young as they were, these men moved like veterans, like pros with years of experience. Officers and enlisted men all worked as a team. You don't get this good just by accident. There must be a good reason. I hadn't yet discovered just what it was. Almost from the moment this operation began, the Sky Soldiers met scattered enemy resistance. Day after day, for 4 days, the brigade moved ahead. Sometimes through jungle so dense you could hardly see the sky. Other times over fields where there was no cover at all. Everywhere the insects. And the heat pressing down like lead. Although the Viet Cong were hard to find and refused to hold their ground, many bunkers were uncovered. Viet Cong base camps were rendered useless and their supplies captured to distribute to local villagers. At the end of the fourth day, the brigade was picked up and returned to Bien Hua. The only way to get to know an outfit is to stay with it in camp as well as in the field. During the next few weeks, talking to the men gave me an opportunity to learn the brigade's background and explained much of the reason for its esprit de corps and its efficiency in combat. The 173rd was activated June 25, 1963, around a nucleus of the 2nd Airborne Battle Group of the 503rd Infantry, the direct descendant of the 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment known as the Rock, which had jumped on Corregidor in World War II. Around these men, they formed a balanced airborne combat force. It was the first and only separate airborne brigade in the United States Army. For 2 years, these men, under the command and guidance of General Williamson and his staff, had been working and training together until they'd been forged into a unique, self-supporting strike force, capable of handling any emergency, any time, any place. These fighting men had trained in Okinawa, Thailand, the Philippines, and Taiwan. Their jungle skills had been honed razor sharp, and every last one was a qualified jumper. Airborne all the way. This was truly a crack outfit where re-enlistment often ran as high as 100%, and you can't get better than that. Although the brigade mounted many attacks in an area northeast of Saigon called War Zone D, which was supposed to be an impregnable Viet Cong fortress, contact with the enemy was always light and scattered. The VC preferred to lose large amounts of food and supplies and to give up their bases rather than stand and fight. It wasn't long before the Sky Soldiers found out why. Along with some captured supplies, documents were found which read, "Avoid fighting with the men who carry the little black rifles unless you have a much stronger force than they have." About this time, the brigade took on an international flavor. Attached to it were Australian troops, veterans of the Malaysian campaign, trained in counter-guerrilla warfare. These battle-seasoned soldiers were a welcome addition, fitting right in with the rest of the units. These Aussies were soon to be joined by troops from neighboring New Zealand. In July, War Zone D was the scene of a massive attack against the Viet Cong. Vietnamese soldiers fought side by side with the troopers of the 173rd. It was a large-scale operation, with the full resources of the brigade employed against the Viet Cong. When the 173rd moves out on an operation like this, 60% of its support troops accompany the combat unit. At first, the fighting was light with little opposition. Then it got tougher. The Sky Soldiers are tough, aggressive fighters, and the deeper into the jungle they went, the fiercer the fighting got. Wherever the enemy was too deeply entrenched, the artillery blasted them loose. General Williamson's policy was spend bullets, not bodies. The operation lasted 4 days and was a tremendous success. There were more than 400 Viet Cong casualties and 50 prisoners captured. Over 100 tons of weapons and supplies had been taken. And thousands of documents captured, which proved to be a gold mine for intelligence. The brigade moved on from success to success. Phuoc Tuy, where a Viet Cong supply route was destroyed. Pleiku and Kon Tum in the central highlands to lift a siege and clear the roads for an Arvin relief column. And the so-called Iron Triangle. The Iron Triangle was an area where no friendly forces had set foot for more than a year. Air Force strikes, artillery fire, and Army gunships prepared the way. Then the infantry moved in, sweeping through the jungle. Despite the fact that the enemy was strongly dug in many areas, the Sky Soldiers rooted them out. And kept pressing right on. But in combat, even the victors must suffer casualties. Fortunately, the Sky Soldiers' casualties were light. The medics exposed themselves time and again to care for the wounded. In Vietnam, Dust-Off is the affectionate code name for the medical evacuation helicopters, and they perform miracles in getting in and out of almost impossible spots. It took 6 days to work through the Iron Triangle. But when it was over, the Viet Cong had lost over 100 men, 6 camps, and thousands of pounds of supplies and food. The myth of the Iron Triangle had been broken and was to stay that way for over a year. As important as defeating the Viet Cong is the need to win the loyalty of the Vietnamese people. To this end, the men of the brigade applied themselves with the same spirit they showed in facing the enemy. A well-rounded program of civic action was initiated. An important part of it was routine medical treatment. To help the Vietnamese help themselves, heavy equipment was provided to build and restore roads. The men volunteered their free time to help in the construction of schools. And in educating the Vietnamese. Food and clothing were provided for villagers who had fled from Viet Cong oppression. For the first time in more than a year, many of the villagers were able to go freely to church, one that the 173rd had helped them to build. Sanitary wells were dug in villages that had never had clean, pure water. On their own time, and in some cases out of their own pockets, the Sky Soldiers undertook the sponsorship of orphanages and helped refurbish schools and playgrounds for the children. One of the brigade's most unique missions was Operation U-Life. For more than 2 years, the Viet Cong had controlled the rice harvest in this rich and fertile area. The mission was to drive out the VC, restore government control, and protect the harvest. In addition to the airlifted troops, long-range ground patrols helped to forge a long chain, which drew tighter as the troops swept across the area. By moving at night as well as by day, the 173rd broke another myth, that only the Viet Cong dared to move in the dark. By such actions, the Sky Soldiers began to win the confidence of the local population and to loosen the grip of terror that the VC held over the Vietnamese peasants. Kindness and decent treatment of the villagers, as well as the work of the civic action teams, resulted in bringing entire villages over to the side of the government. More than 300 of the VC were captured in this operation, and the local Viet Cong battalion defeated. For the first time in 2 years, the people of the region harvested their crop without fear, and the local government could once again function. As proof of the effectiveness of civic action and psychological warfare efforts, nearly 60 ralliers or defectors from the Viet Cong came in with their weapons to surrender. For the 173rd, the missions continued. There was Operation Marauder, directed against a VC battalion. They defeated the battalion and captured rosters which identified every man belonging to the local VC. In Operation Crimp, they uncovered a VC base camp in Hobo Woods, which included a tunnel complex that was 3 miles long and 6 levels deep. Operation followed operation. Dexter, Yorktown, Aurora 1, Aurora 2, Hardyhood, and Toledo, with little or no break between operations. Operation Sioux City took them back to Zone D once again. Once more, the Viet Cong avoided full contact. But large stores of clothing, weapons, and other supplies were captured. The last operation I saw the 173rd carry out was Junction City. This was to be the largest multi-division operation to date. The target was War Zone C, near the Cambodian border, northwest of Saigon. The entire brigade was committed. But this time there was a difference. This was to be the first parachute deployment by American forces in the Vietnam conflict. The planes are bigger and faster today, but this is how it must have been when the old 503rd parachuted down on Corregidor in World War II. This is how it is with the men of the 173rd. No one hesitates, each one is raring to go. Security was good, but there was some VC ground fire aimed at the paratroopers. A few of the jumpers found holes in their chutes to bear this out, but the only injuries were a few sprained ankles. When the jumpers were on the ground, the VC really opened up. The first job was to secure the drop zone. When it was secure, the C-130s began dropping the heavy stuff, equipment, and supplies. Operation Junction City was the biggest in Vietnam up to that time. The men of the 173rd did their job all the way. I've often wondered what makes an outfit like the 173rd Airborne the way it is. Part of it is due to the men who lead it, like General Williamson, who was responsible for organizing and shaping it, and General Smith, who took command in Vietnam in 1966, followed by General Dean, who led the jump in Operation Junction City. Part of it is the training. The tougher the going gets, the better they seem to like it. Mostly it's pride. Pride in being part of an elite outfit of volunteers, one of the pros. They don't brag, but one of their infantry battalions was presented the Distinguished Unit Citation by General Westmoreland. By the time I left, they had 4 Medal of Honor winners among them, scores of Silver Stars, and they don't bother to count their Purple Hearts. These are the men of the 173rd Airborne Brigade, separate, airborne, all the way. By now, most of the men of the 173rd that I knew have rotated to new assignments. The ranks are filled with new names and faces. But the Sky Soldiers are still in Vietnam, fighting and working to help the Vietnamese people to build a free society of their own choice. And they'll probably stay until the job is done. Well done.
The Black Horse Regiment, the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, brought a new look to Vietnam. The natural barriers and unfriendly terrain in Vietnam make it tough for today's modern machine war. But surprisingly, American mechanized units have surmounted these obstacles through ingenuity and sheer determination. And it takes determination, especially when you can't see what's ahead, even 10 feet away. A jungle might seem like a strange place for armored vehicles that can cover hundreds of miles per day in open country. Yet when the enemy can be anywhere, armor means a lot to the foot soldier. Armor helps the soldier beat a path. Armor means firepower, that extra wallop that keeps the enemy from concentrating his forces. Today's mechanized cavalry means mobility and speed, a prime requirement of modern warfare. Since their arrival in Vietnam, the cavalry troopers of the Black Horse Regiment have built a proud record of accomplishment while fulfilling their military missions. Under unique battlefield conditions never before encountered by mechanized ground forces, they built a record of leadership, of ingenuity, spirit, and valor that will always live in the annals of the 11th Armored Cavalry in Vietnam. New ways to do old jobs had to be found, and these men were equal to the task. The 3rd Corps area where the regiment was assigned contains the capital of South Vietnam, Saigon, important cities such as Bien Hua and the Rice Bowl provinces. It also included strategic areas such as the Elephant's Ear and the trackless jungles of the Cambodian border. As an independent force in this vital area, the 11th Armored Cavalry gave needed support to elements of U.S. and Allied forces. Immediately after arrival at the port of Vung Tau in September 1966, the regiment moved to the important headquarters base of Long Binh for staging. Then onward to Xuan Loc and the creation of its own base camp. The regiment was welcomed by General Creighton Abrams, later commander of all U.S. forces in Vietnam. He discussed equipment and organization with Colonel Cobb, the regiment's first commander in Vietnam. At the conclusion of his welcoming visit, General Abrams was impressed with this vital new fighting team. The familiar armored personnel carriers had been beefed up for the counterinsurgency mission in Vietnam. Each vehicle was fitted with 2 additional machine guns, and modification of armor gave crewmen greater protection. The crew of 5 men included the vehicle commander, driver, grenadier, and gunners. The result was the Armored Cav Assault Vehicle, or ACAV, the key vehicle of the new light armored platoons. After it had been proved in combat, the ACAV was soon employed in other units throughout Vietnam. Heavier armor, typified by the M48 tank, provided each squadron with a big punch. The newest armored vehicle with the 11th is the Sheridan. It mounts a 152-millimeter gun, which also launches the Shillelagh missile. Self-propelled artillery was also part of the squadrons and was assigned to individual units in whatever mix the commander required. In the days ahead, artillery support would prove to be a valuable asset. At first, the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment was equipped with self-propelled 105mm howitzers. Later, these were to be replaced by 155mm howitzers, which have greater range. The regiment became a completely mobile reconnaissance and striking force. They became the only freewheeling armored unit of its kind in combat in Vietnam. Within its squadrons were custom vehicles and special purpose weapons, such as heavy mortars capable of devastating fire, and highly trained mobile advisory scouts. A Thunderhorse troop of air cavalry. Within 3 weeks of arrival, units of the 11th had met the enemy, beginning with a fight for the regiment's line of communication. The Viet Cong had plenty of warning as the long lines of armor rolled down the roads and into the northern sector of the core area. Friendly observers reported the enemy was rising to the bait, preparing ambushes. In Operation Atlanta, the men of the 11th routed the ambushes with overwhelming firepower, taking a heavy toll in enemy dead and captured. Many of the enemy's weapons were seized. Best of all, the Viet Cong learned respect for the regiment at the outset. And the people of Long Con province were free again. This initial success made the task easier. As the Black Horse base camp began to grow, its resupply and security gained importance. Headquarters became a hub of activity. Everywhere the camp was being developed into a comfortable main base, even though a large part remained under canvas. Communications were an important reason for the camp's existence. Powerful electronics equipment at the Tactical Operations Center allowed full communications with higher headquarters at Long Binh, and with field units which had mobile armored command posts. When in position, these field units were made secure against enemy night raids. Concertina wire encircled the area. During daylight hours, these forward outposts were busy centers of planning and direction. In all, this communications network proved an outstanding support for the troopers in the field. Fanning out from the base, armored convoys patrolled the area and protected vital supply lines as they kept the roads open. Often an armored patrol guarded an important junction or other strategic point. After long hours of patrolling far from their base, men and vehicles would pull off the road to rest. During these short periods of respite, however, the alert troopers never wandered very far from their vehicles. Purely and simply, this was enemy country. For days at a time, they were on duty 24 hours a day. But they never dropped their guard, and it was mighty hard for Charlie to disturb the peace. In January 1967, Operation Cedar Falls swept the Iron Triangle area northwest of Saigon, a long-time enemy hideout. The 11th Armored Cavalry acted as a pushing force, beating the bushes for the enemy, driving them into a waiting blocking force composed of main U.S. and Allied forces. It was a tough, dangerous job, much of it in country where a man could not see the front of his vehicle from the driver's seat. Mile by mile, the men of the Black Horse Regiment helped flush the VC out of their tunnels. They found everything and anything which the enemy could use to carry out his mission. No road was safe from VC booby traps. Here, a hole to trap our vehicles with a path left for the enemy to use. The answer to this one, beat a new path and move on. The operation was an unqualified success. Documents captured from the enemy attested to the hardships they had suffered as the armored units closed in. Then came the Rice Bowl country. In the Vodat region, the men of the Black Horse helped keep the fields and the roads free, so the crop would be safe from seizure by the Viet Cong. Also, the presence of armored units kept the peace and kept the enemy from intimidating the villages. Bridges launched by armored vehicles were often laid down to keep traffic flowing. Flash flooding of small streams washed away the crude, locally built bridges, and buses were unable to make their scheduled destinations. The military bridges helped speed them on their way. The prime purpose of road and highway upkeep, however, was to keep the region open for the fluent movement of military convoys. Here in the Vodat region, this scissors bridge was a useful complement to the regiment's armored strength. It could be erected or removed quickly and without any construction work. In addition to aiding military vehicular traffic, these portable bridges opened newer and shorter routes to nearby marketplaces for the villagers and farmers of the area. As the need presented itself, these scissors bridges were moved from one locale to another with ease and speed. In the province of Tai Ninh, along the Cambodian border in the country called the Elephant's Ear, units of the 11th penetrated into terrain previously considered too rough for vehicles. Once again, the men of the 11th Armored Cavalry beat the jungle, pressing forward regardless of terrain. There in the dense rainforests, they went after the enemy's hiding places. And the enemy was there. Once again, the assigned mission was accomplished. In Operation Junction City, a sweep through Tai Ninh and War Zone C during July 1967, roam plows cleared the jungle along the roadsides. Military convoys and the South Vietnamese people could use the roads in greater safety. From the air, it was now possible to spot any Viet Cong activity near these vital roadways. Tanks were used to keep the roads open at strategic points, firing to keep the enemy off balance. During the operation, command and control were maintained through the airborne units, making it easier for field commanders to visit various units often. The air cavalry troop of the regiment, known as Thunderhorse, had its own helicopter gunships and transports. Forward air controllers performed effective liaison between the Air Force and our armored units. By August 1967, Black Horse Base Camp was well established and offered the returning troopers many of the comforts of home. The return to action comes all too soon. With the almost unbelievable complication of trying to fight a war in which both friends and enemies might be found in the same general area, extreme accuracy is a must when firing heavy weapons. Special weapons like this 4.2-inch mortar mounted in carriers provide additional fire support to the squadrons.
Fire!
But it isn't all fighting. Men of the 11th Cav worked closely with soldiers of the South Vietnamese Army to help train local cadre in self-defense. The maintenance and use of field communications equipment was one of the primary training courses. Other instruction included weapons, such as the carbine. Drills for crews serving mortars soon familiarized the Allied soldiers with these weapons. And as we worked with them, the ARVN soldiers gained confidence. It was now late fall of 1967. As the war continued and operations expanded, the safety of convoys became a continuing responsibility. A young security officer of the 3rd Squadron makes sure his men understand their orders and special road instructions. Then the long haul over dirt roads begins. Enemy hijackers waiting to seize this valuable convoy of supplies will call it off when they see the armored units. The Medical Civilian Assistance Program was also guarded against surprise by the 11th Cav, while hundreds of people who had no other medical care were treated. Here, the doctors and medical staff were enabled to care for young and old alike without fear of being interrupted in their work. In Operation Santa Fe, the 11th worked with the Australians who learned to use the American equipment. The Aussies handled the American armor like veterans. During Operation Santa Fe in Xuan Loc province, the Aussies conducted a large sweeping operation, driving the enemy forces into the waiting trap set up by the armored units of the Black Horse Regiment. The operation went off with clock-like precision as the Australians pressed the enemy back. Armored flamethrowers were used to clear tree lines and suspected enemy positions. Then came the Vietnamese New Year, Tet. The enemy chose this occasion to unleash well-coordinated attacks in several areas of the Republic. Everywhere, the Viet Cong were met with counterattacks. Striking treacherously where least expected, the Viet Cong brought the war to the cities of South Vietnam. Gunfire roared in the streets and panic spread throughout the population. The 11th Cav rose to the challenge, and in a lightning-fast road march from the area near Cambodia, raced to the defense of the embattled cities. There they supported the ARVN troops, cutting off enemy escape routes. The city of Bien Hua was secured by the armored assault of the 3rd Squadron, in which the enemy was routed in house-to-house fighting. The 11th was also sent to the defense of the capital, Saigon. Large areas of the capital's residential section had been laid to waste by concentrated Viet Cong rocket attacks and mortar bombardment. The people, displaced, wandered aimlessly through the district. In the midst of all this, the fighting continued as military police patrolled the city. Day and night, in the alleys and in the streets, the relentless hunt for Charlie carried the armored cavalrymen into every nook and cranny of the capital. The enemy was forced to give ground with appalling losses. The Arvin forces distinguished themselves during the Tet campaign, acting aggressively to free their cities. Wherever they went, they were solidly backed by armor, often that of the 11th Armored Cavalry or their own armor. A few days after the initial attacks, the Arvin began to retake and free the cities. Soon it became evident that communications had been secured. The bridges remained open. Once again, traffic began to flow with armored vehicles everywhere. The Cholan area, the so-called Chinatown of Saigon. Here, after the first victories at Bien Hua and Saigon, the 11th Cav stayed in the thick of the fight. Troopers of the Black Horse moved methodically from block to block, probing into every building along the way. Finally, it became apparent the Viet Cong had left the area, and there would be no more battles in the streets. As the cities were pacified and the people could begin to pick up the blasted pieces of their lives, the Valorous Unit Award was granted to the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment by the Secretary of the Army. In part, it said, "The 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment was a major factor in eliminating the enemy threat. The men of the regiment displayed extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty, which are in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service." And so the tide of Tet was quickly turned from threat to opportunity as the Allied forces launched crushing blows against the enemy in the 3rd Corps area. Wherever Viet Cong underground fortifications were discovered, they were blown sky high. In Operation Viet Thanh, which means resolved to win, the men of the Black Horse, together with the 25th Arvin Division, moved northwest of Saigon. The Arvin troops, with confidence, went in after the enemy. Here the tanks and ACAVs maneuvered like cavalry and did so for 41 straight days, supporting the Arvin troops wherever they went. There was a lot of hard, dangerous work ferreting out the Viet Cong. The enemy, long in control of this area, had over a period of years burrowed into the earth, creating a labyrinth of underground fighting and sleeping positions. Searching through this complex was not only difficult, but time-consuming. In every way, the Black Horse Regiment had earned its spurs. By early spring 1968, the Black Horse insignia, granted under fire in Vietnam, became a symbol of valor. Searching for communist mines was an unpleasant task. In order to maintain regular convoys, the roads were checked by mine-sweeping teams every day. The enemy, operating under cover of darkness, would plant mines along the most heavily traveled roads, despite the best efforts of our patrols. A portion of the road safe today was unsafe tomorrow. Almost every mine sweep uncovered something lethal. a Chinese communist 20-pound mine, big enough to blow the tracks off an ACAV. Once uncovered, these mines were destroyed by demolition experts using charges of plastic explosives. For these men, this is the daily war, the no-headline war of nerve-wracking uncertainty, of constant plodding and searching where every footstep may lead to injury or death. This is modern mine warfare, brought to new dimensions by a cunning enemy. Despite everything, however, the 11th Armored Cavalry continues to forge ahead. In a land where even the earth itself fights against men and machines, the vast logistics of maintenance and repair keep them rolling. In the open country, through the jungles, and in the cities. Throughout the 3rd Corps area, or wherever they are needed, the men of the regiment fight on for freedom with the help of armored mobile firepower. These are the men who proudly wear the insignia of the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment in Vietnam. Symbol of valor, the Black Horse patch.
Okay, move out.
Air mobile operations are commonplace in the war in Vietnam. Helicopters used as transports, carrying men, weapons, and materiel, soaring easily over terrain obstacles that would have immobilized ground vehicles. Helicopters bombarding the enemy with rockets. Spraying him with high-volume automatic weapons fire. Helicopters as aerial cavalry, swooping down from the skies to achieve the classic effects of speed and shock action, but with immensely more firepower than ground cavalry. Only a few short years ago, air mobile operations was just an experimental doctrine, a concept never tested under actual battle conditions. It was only fitting and proper that air mobile operations should have been first tried in combat by the 1st Cavalry Division of World War II and Korea fame. Riding helicopters instead of horses or mechanized vehicles, it was renamed the 1st Cavalry Division Air Mobile. The air mobile concept of using organic Army aircraft to perform the combat functions of wheeled and tracked vehicles was carefully developed and tested in 2.5 years of intensive effort at the Army's Great Infantry Training Center, Fort Benning, Georgia. These revolutionary innovations were tried out by an experimental organization known as the 11th Air Assault Division. Its trained cadres and tested equipment provided a major component of the 1st Cavalry Division Air Mobile when it was activated July 1st, 1965. Shortly afterward, it received orders to move from Fort Benning to South Vietnam. Its mission, to set up an air mobile base in the central highlands of Vietnam. This base was called An Khe. It set many precedents as an air mobile combat base of operations. It was built around helipads. Compactness was a prime element in design. To make the base as impregnable as possible, it was encircled by a cleared strip 100 meters wide. Howitzer batteries were dug in, ready to deliver pre-planned artillery fire on potential enemy mortar sites. Outposts of riflemen and machine gunners dotted the perimeter of the base, on watch day and night, while combat patrols scoured the area on foot. Within the base, military police manned additional checkpoints and barriers. Another security force was posted on top of a mountain overlooking the base. Because of this strong web of defenses, An Khe could be protected by a minimum number of men, leaving the rest free to hunt down the enemy. So highly trained and motivated was the division that the An Khe base, serving every type of fixed-wing and rotary aircraft, was completed in record time. The Army's 1st Air Mobile Division was ready to prove itself in battle only 2 months after being sent to Vietnam. The division was given a vast tactical area of responsibility, ranging from the South China Sea to the Cambodian border, and approximately 150 miles from north to south. Only certain parts of the coastal plain and nearby valleys were built up and populated. The interior of the operational zone was sparsely settled. Its highlands and mountains were thickly covered with jungle and forest. Into this wild, rugged environment, wholly favorable to a wily enemy skilled in guerrilla warfare, the Sky Cavalry launched its first air assaults in September and October of 1965. Though limited in scope, these engagements with the enemy proved that the helicopter had brought remarkable new advantages to the strategy and tactics of ground warfare. Greater mobility for infantry forces and supporting artillery. Additional firepower. Quick-firing howitzers on the ground were supplemented by aerial rocket artillery. As well as high-volume machine gun fire. Reconnaissance by fire gained in effectiveness. When door gunners swept suspected areas of concealment with machine gun bursts, the enemy was provoked into shooting back, thus revealing his presence and location. Command posts could be made air mobile so that unit commanders were able to direct air and ground attacks from a vantage point right over the battlefield. Equipment damaged in the field could be retrieved by air, swiftly repaired and returned to battle. Logistics operations were speeded up enormously. Vital cargo was delivered in record time, right into the hands of troops in the battle zone. Helicopters as flying ambulances saved many lives, carrying the wounded from firing line to field hospital, sometimes in a matter of minutes. All these advantages of air mobile warfare were confirmed in the first days of combat. This early baptism by fire gave the division invaluable experience for its first major engagement, the Pleiku campaign. This was to have historic significance. For many years, North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces had been operating with impunity in the area of Pleiku province. Secure in a remote sanctuary near the Cambodian border, a North Vietnamese Army division was getting ready for a major offensive. This was to be a powerful thrust eastward, with the ultimate objective of cutting South Vietnam in two. The first step in this plan was carried out on October 13th, when the North Vietnamese 33rd Regiment attacked a Special Forces camp at Ple Mai. This attack was meant to lure the South Vietnamese into sending a strong relief force to the aid of Ple Mai. Another North Vietnam Army regiment, the 32nd, was waiting in ambush along the line of march. The trap was sprung on the unwary ARVN troops on October 24th. It almost succeeded. However, the South Vietnamese fought back strongly, even though taken by surprise. The 1st Cav was called to the rescue. Air assault infantry was rushed into the jungle to secure an artillery landing zone. They were sent from the division's advanced command post at Pleiku to an area close to the ambush site north of Ple Mai. Known as LZ Field Goal, this area was immediately occupied by artillery flown in from Pleiku. These guns supported the ARVN troops in their effort to break out of the ambush and protected the relief column when it resumed its march to Ple Mai. At the same time, another battery harassed the North Vietnamese 33rd Regiment, attacking the Special Forces camp. This shelling was so accurate, the NVA broke off its siege and withdrew to the west. As a result, the Air Cav's limited role was changed. By order of General Westmoreland, it was sent on an all-out offensive to find and engage the enemy, thus blocking further attack plans. Air cavalry squadrons promptly searched large areas west of Ple Mai, seeking out communist forces concealed in the lush foliage below. Helicopters swooped down to skim the ground at low level, sweeping the landscape with reconnaissance by fire to provoke the enemy into revealing himself. Next, infantry battalions were air assaulted deep into North Vietnamese strongholds. The rifle companies were dispersed over several landing zones. Each company set out patrols to search aggressively for the enemy. On November 1st, 1965, the Sky Troopers hit pay dirt. They attacked and overran an enemy outpost on the Ya Te, the Tay River. A full-size battle erupted when the North Vietnamese Army threw in a battalion of men against 3 Air Cav platoons. However, helicopter troop carriers took off night and day, pouring reinforcements onto the battlefield. It was a brilliant display of the air mobile ability to replace combat-weary and wounded soldiers with fresh troops. Assisted by deadly accurate artillery support, Air Force tactical strikes, and aerial rocket artillery, the troopers chopped up the NVA 33rd Regiment that had besieged Ple Mai. The enemy was forced to withdraw to its base camp at Anta Village in the Ya Drang Valley. The North Vietnamese were stopped cold for the moment. The 1st Cav continued to push westward in its relentless search for the enemy, licking its wounds in its hideouts in the Ya Drang Valley. As part of this continuing search, a battalion of Sky troops flew into a tiny landing zone, soon to be famous under the name of LZ X-Ray. LZ X-Ray was a clearing deep in the valley of the Ya Drang and located at the foot of the mountains of the Chupong Massif, in the very heart of enemy country. The NVA, reinforced by units of the newly infiltrated 66th Regiment, made an all-out effort to destroy the Air Cav battalion. Their idea, evidently, was to make X-ray the scene of a miniature Dien Bien Phu. They had not reckoned on the valor of the Sky Troopers, who fought all the more fiercely when units were cut off and temporarily isolated from their comrades in arms. Nor did the enemy understand how the seemingly unprotected infantrymen could call in the support of air-mobile artillery with such unbelievable speed. Shelled incessantly, blasted by aerial rockets, seared with fiery strikes by U.S. Air Force fighter bombers, the NVA was drenched in a rain of fires that decimated his attacking forces. The Sky Troopers had to pay a price, but they had turned the communist plan into a disastrous nightmare. The enemy losses in dead and wounded were tremendous. Once more, the enemy survivors withdrew to regroup their broken units, but they were hounded by demoralizing B-52 raids that pounded them in their mountain strongholds. The X-ray victors were ordered to get out of the way of the B-52 bombings by marching overland to 2 landing zones. One was an artillery landing zone dubbed LZ Columbus, and the other was for helicopters, its name LZ Albany. The Columbus-bound unit reached the LZ without incident. But the troopers bound for LZ Albany ran headlong into a strong enemy column marching to attack the air-mobile artillery at LZ Columbus. A fierce firefight resulted. It was, in the end, another disaster for the enemy. By November 24th, the NVA was recoiling in defeat, abandoning its camps in the Ya Drang and the Chupong Mountains. They retreated, taking their wounded with them. Left behind were almost 2,000 enemy dead and prisoners, plus large stores of supplies and many weapons. The Pleiku campaign, better known to 1st Cav men as the Battle of the Ya Drang Valley, was over. Its effect was profound and long-lasting. The American victory proved that the best of the enemy forces, North Vietnam Army regulars, could be stopped cold and destroyed in their own sanctuaries. No longer could the communists hope to win the war on the battlefield. Most important to the men of the 1st Cavalry Division, Ya Drang had proved beyond question the soundness of the air-mobile approach to ground warfare. It was a well-deserved award when the Air Cav received a Presidential Unit Citation for the entire division and its supporting units. An award so rare, it had been made only 5 times in Army history. The division's main thrust in 1966 turned toward the central coastal region of South Vietnam, particularly in the area of Bang Son, a town which gave the campaign its name. Strong air-mobile forces carried out a lightning series of forays against the Viet Cong, who held over 140,000 people in subjection. Each operation was carried out with polished efficiency, using tactics now thoroughly tested in battle. Devastating pre-strike bombardment by Air Force fighter bombers. Attached supporting artillery. Gunships darting in to strafe the landing zone perimeter with rocket fire. Automatic weapons. Infantry assault waves rushing from troop carriers to set up a defense line on the LZ perimeter, while succeeding waves of riflemen advanced through them. Beginning with an airlift into the An Lao Valley, the troopers pushed through all kinds of terrain in their pursuit of the enemy. They rooted out the VC from well-camouflaged nests of bunkers and tunnels. The fighting was bitter, and casualties inevitable. By the spring of 1966, scores of villages had been flushed to the enemy, and hundreds of suspects identified for questioning. The immediate threat to Bang San and other coastal cities was ended. In the operations that followed during the rest of the year, Thayer, Pershing, John Paul Jones, Paul Revere, and many more, the 1st Cav, often working with ARVN or Korean troops, continued to clear the huge rice-producing province of Binh Dinh of VC control. The cavalrymen took time whenever they could to feed the liberated South Vietnamese, who had been stripped of their crops by the Viet Cong. Many Vietnamese received medical care for the first time for ailments that had afflicted them all their lives. The speedy air-mobile assaults of the 1st Cav brought impressive results, as many NVA soldiers surrendered, bringing large quantities of their weapons with them. With every operation, the 1st Cav continued to improve its air-mobile techniques. One lesson learned was to travel as light as possible. Troopers carried only weapons, ammo, and 2 canteens of water, depending on helicopters for further supply. The artillery learned how to be weight watchers, too. The M102 version of the 105mm howitzer was 1,200 pounds lighter than the earlier model. Bulky radio equipment was scaled down in size and weight. This assembly of 2 radio sets and an intercom was reduced from 600 to 150 pounds. Collapsible fuel bladders, each with a 500-gallon capacity, replaced metal containers and were air transportable. This technical ingenuity, always air-mobile oriented, paid off as operations rolled on into 1967 with Pershing, Wheeler, Jeb Stuart, and others. The pressure on the enemy never relented as the choppers took to the air day and night in foul weather as well as fair. Nowhere in this wild, trackless country was the Viet Cong safe from air-mobile probes. They were pursued deep into the jungle, sought out high on mountaintops. They were challenged in their most distant hideouts. It made no difference that the 1st Cav men who had come to Vietnam in 1965, the original 1st team, had all been rotated home. It was a completely fresh division now, but it was still very much the 1st team. They took over with smooth professionalism, planning each operation minutely, then lashing out at the Viet Cong with swift, stunning air assaults. The most battle-hardened enemy troops broke under the rain of fires that lashed at them incessantly from the air. And from the ground as giant 8-inch howitzers reinforced the air-mobile batteries. Throughout 1967, the 1st Cav troopers constantly took the initiative, showing that they too could use the cunning arts of guerrilla warfare, stalking the enemy across rice paddies, swamps, through jungle and forest, frequently stopping to slug it out in one firefight after another, virtually toe-to-toe, breaking his will to resist, destroying him when he took refuge in tunnel or bunker. The toll among the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese rose steeply, with a record number killed in Operation Jeb Stuart, while scores of others surrendered. It was a grind, but only the troopers' feet tired, not their fighting spirit. They were heartened by the armor that joined the ground forces whenever terrain allowed. Armored personnel carriers and foot soldiers spraying enemy positions with machine gun fire, small arms, grenades. These spoiling actions kept the enemy off balance, forcing him repeatedly to abort attack plans. When he chose to fight because of superior numbers, the 1st Cav poured in reinforcements with air mobile swiftness. This quick reaction capability paid off early in 1968. When the Viet Cong launched its Tet Offensive against South Vietnamese cities, diversionary tactics to pin down 1st Cav units were quickly thrown back by the fast-moving, hard-fighting sky troopers. Not long afterward, the Air Cav men played a major role in the relief of Khe Sanh, where a Marine regiment and South Vietnamese troops were encircled by North Vietnam Army units. To relieve them, elements of the 1st Cav were committed to Operation Pegasus in April of 1968. Jumping off from an advanced base at LZ Stud, the sky troopers set out to link up with the defenders of Khe Sanh. Resistance was light. The air cavalrymen easily broke through and found Khe Sanh to be a very dusty place. When the dust settled, it was business as usual for the sky troopers. The aerial supply chain went into high gear. Attack plans were made with the usual 1st Cav efficiency. The troopers went about the job they knew and liked best: to engage the enemy, harass and punish him with firepower. Then fearlessly close with him, storming the bunkers and strong points with which he had surrounded the Marine base. This cleanup operation was pursued vigorously into the summer of 1968, when Khe Sanh, having outlived its strategic usefulness, was closed down. The northwest corner of South Vietnam, where Khe Sanh is located, has a long, irregular border in common with Laos. It is ideal country for infiltration. The North Vietnamese were quick to move troops and supplies into the remote A Shau Valley via the Ho Chi Minh Trail. High in the mountains, the valley is covered with a triple canopy jungle, 100 feet tall, and shrouded in fog and mist 10 months of the year. This near-perfect sanctuary was broken into by the air cavalrymen in the spring of 1968. The flying troopers coordinated their battle actions with paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division and the South Vietnamese Army. Murderously heavy fire from high-altitude anti-aircraft guns attempted to turn back the A Shau invasion. Several aircraft were lost, but the troop-carrying choppers made their touchdown. The cavalrymen found an extensive road net, but few signs of the enemy in person. There was little resistance. The North Vietnamese had literally run for the hills. The cavalrymen consoled themselves with the knowledge that they had captured, virtually intact, one of the greatest storehouses of weapons and war materiel ever assembled by the communists in South Vietnam. The Air Cav met each blow with lightning-swift counterblows, sending its air mobile power ranging far and wide to support other units of the Allied forces in combined operations. Supremely confident in its brilliant battle record and the success of its air mobile doctrine, now accepted throughout the United States Army, the 1st Cav continues to serve far from home as long as needed. The pioneering days of air mobile operations are past. Changes and improvements impend. Bigger, more powerful Army aircraft, promising even more effective helicopter tactics. In these advances, the 1st Cavalry Division Air Mobile will, as always, lead the way.
This is the motion picture trademark of COSBIN, the Central Office for South Vietnam. COSBIN is the communist organization and command headquarters that is directing the war effort against the Republic of Vietnam.
The motion pictures that you're about to see were produced by the newsreel facilities of COSBIN. They were captured several months ago near the Cambodian border by elements of the 173rd Airborne Brigade. Now, many of the captured newsreels were damaged or of poor quality, but we salvaged enough film to provide a good close-up look of the Viet Cong and their operations. In the first sequence, we take you behind enemy lines for a series of reports of the VC in combat. Now, these scenes of preparation and action were probably staged, but they do show the Viet Cong tactics and techniques.
Translated, this title reads, Military Operations by the 9th Viet Cong Main Force Division in retaliation for the bombings of Hanoi and Haiphong. Division members are summoned before the division political officer just prior to moving to the attack site. Squad and platoon leaders wear banners proclaiming their determination to avenge the bombings of the North. Similar pledges are printed on cards fastened to the hats of individual soldiers. Here, the division political officer presents ropes to regimental political officers as a sign of his confidence that the battle will be won and prisoners will be taken. The regimental political officers, in turn, use the ropes to inspire confidence in the soldiers directly under their command. The bugler sounds the attack, and the individual platoons and companies move on foot to their respective positions. The Viet Cong attack is against an American armored personnel carrier. The vehicle is destroyed and several members of its crew are killed. Prisoners captured during the battle are marched barefoot through the jungle. Next, we have a series of newsreel sequences on Viet Cong attacks against Allied units in South Vietnam. With Tay Nin's Black Virgin Mountains in the background, the communist guerrillas make ready. Women and children carry supplies and ammunition to the designated depots. The weapons and equipment used by the VC are Soviet models, most of which have been manufactured in communist China. first attack will be against a South Vietnamese outpost, manned by soldiers of the Civilian Irregular Defense Group, the CIDG. A final communications check is made using both communist and captured American manufactured equipment. The South Vietnamese forces walk into the ambush and the Viet Cong open fire. Again, the dead are both South Vietnamese and Americans. The jungle has provided the Viet Cong with a strategic sanctuary from which to strike. When the battle is ended, no weapons are left behind. Any Viet Cong who brings in an enemy weapon is decorated for his heroic deed. The captured equipment is of great importance to the communists in their guerrilla war. And this fact is emphasized strongly in these propaganda newsreels. When the weapons and ammunition have been returned to the base camp, they're logged in, stockpiled, and checked out for the next communist assault. The enemy in the Republic of Vietnam makes use of every tactic, old and new, in guerrilla warfare. In this next sequence, the Viet Cong company commander plots an all-out attack against a small South Vietnamese hamlet. The bugler once again sounds the charge, and the VC stream out of the jungle to overrun the settlement. The communists have undergone grueling physical training programs to prepare themselves, emotionally and psychologically, for the harsh demands of guerrilla warfare. Attacks such as the one shown here are undertaken to harass Allied units in the area. Prisoners are taken, and they're identified as members of the Civilian Irregular Defense Guard and the 10th Vietnamese Government Army Division. The PWs, as in the earlier sequence, are marched off for interrogation. With the battle won, the Viet Cong are welcomed into the hamlet by their communist supporters. And according to the original newsreel commentary, a special program is presented by the women of the settlement in tribute to their so-called liberators.
It's important to remember that the film you've seen and will see is Viet Cong propaganda. Its purpose is to show you one side, the communist side, of the conflict in the Republic of Vietnam. At the same time, it does provide a realistic insight into the motives and the methods of the VC. Now, we've seen the enemy in combat. Now let's look at another side of the communist war effort in South Vietnam, in the area of operations that shows the Viet Cong work in the fields of logistics and demolition.
Much of the food, weapons, and equipment used by the Viet Cong is transported into tactical areas by walking the material across the countryside. Here, bags of rice are carried across a river and into the jungle. Women, many of them armed, make up more than half of the communist transportation force. Another of the primary means of transportation is by bicycle. Each bicycle is reinforced so that it can carry more than 300 pounds over rough terrain and up to 500 pounds on level ground. The Viet Cong are equally thorough in their utilization of captured weapons and equipment. Demolition experts disassemble unexploded bombs and remove their destructive contents. Blacksmiths then use the metal to make grenade casings and gun barrels. In the guerrilla warfare that the Viet Cong are waging, nothing is wasted. Everything is utilized. The communists adapt their ways to the war they must fight. Booby traps are fashioned by hand and planted at night outside the perimeter of U.S. and South Vietnamese camps. Next, we see a graphic demonstration of the methods used and the objectives achieved in sabotaging railroads and bridges in the Republic of Vietnam. The communists, wherever they can, coerce or impress local inhabitants to help them in their destructive raids. A government train that has been derailed is grim witness to the effectiveness of the VC tactics. Blasting is more expensive, but the results are also more thorough. Small charges placed at the joints of the rails on both sides of the track can tear open gaps that are undetectable at a distance and will almost certainly cause a derailment. Here, with the aid of a model bridge, a Viet Cong instructor briefs a communist guerrilla before sending him out with the demolition team. The explosive charge is prepared by other members of the guerrilla unit. The VC moved through the jungle toward their objective. Reaching the bridge, the communist guerrillas climb the span to plant their explosives. The locations are pre-planned, for a reconnaissance team has already visited the bridge and determined the best locations for placing the charges. Mission accomplished. The bridge is destroyed.
Up to now, we've been through the eyes of the communist camera at the battlefront with the Viet Cong. In this sequence now, we're going to focus on various propaganda and non-military activities of the enemy. We'll tour War Zone C with Chinese communist correspondents, visit a VC printing office, explore an underground hospital, and watch a propaganda lecture by a 4-star North Vietnamese Army general who's the political officer and commanding general of the self-proclaimed South Vietnamese Liberation Army.
This third segment of our captured Viet Cong newsreels opens with banners and signs welcoming communist Chinese riders on their arrival for a tour of COSVIN facilities in War Zone C. There is the customary exchange of toasts between the guests and their hosts. And as part of the welcoming reception, the representatives of the two communist nations exchange photographs of Ho Chi Minh and Mao Zedong. An entertainment troupe from North Vietnam is also on hand, and the Chinese riders witness a performance of traditional Vietnamese dances. Next, the communist correspondents visit a printing plant that publishes the Viet Cong Liberation newspaper and other propaganda leaflets and literature. They watch the setting of type by a VC craftsman, and they see the operation of the primitive press by the printer and his apprentice. The visit concludes with the presentation to the group of the latest issue of the Viet Cong Liberation newspaper. Located in the heart of War Zone C, the main hospital for COSBIN has facilities to care for up to 500 patients. The wounded Viet Cong soldiers are carried from the battle area to the hospital in hammock-type litters. The casualties are met by doctors and nurses, quickly examined, and assigned to wards in the underground hospital. Once again, the motion pictures give evidence of the ways in which the Viet Cong adapt themselves to the conditions under which they wage their war of insurgency. In these next scenes, the hospital has a distinguished visitor, a 4-star general, Nguyen Chi Thanh, member of the North Vietnam Politburo and former political officer of the North Vietnamese Army. When these films were made, the general was the political officer and commanding general of the Communist Army in South Vietnam. Here, General Thanh walks among the wounded, talking with them and listening to them. Continuing his tour of the underground facilities, the general commends the hospital staff for its contributions to the Viet Cong war effort. General Thanh has a final visit and a word with a wounded VC soldier, pledging continued reinforcements and communist support from the North. Now, a meeting of COSBIN officials held to plan the winter-spring offensive of 1967. The featured speaker is the chief of the political section of COSBIN, Brigadier General Tran Do. The general tells the troops that there are 400,000 men in North Vietnam that can be sent south to aid the Viet Cong forces. In conclusion, he promises that North Vietnam will never negotiate for peace until it has achieved a measure of victory in combat that can be used as a bargaining power in such negotiations.
This, then, is the challenge posed by the Viet Cong and her supporters in South Vietnam. We've seen from their own motion pictures that they're resourceful, disciplined, ruthless, determined. Alert to this threat, aware of this danger, South Vietnam and her allies must meet and defeat the enemy challenge. For in this confrontation between communism and freedom, only one can prevail. Which one it'll be is simply stated: why free men fight in the Republic of Vietnam.
In closing, let us emphasize again that these films were produced as communist propaganda to promote the communist cause in South Vietnam. At the same time, let us also remember that they have provided an in-depth close-up opportunity to know your enemy, the Viet Cong.